Hey everyone, this is Alan Gotro, your host of True Crime, Man's Dark Imagination. And if you like our presentations, please hit the like button, subscribe, and the bell so that you'll be notified of other presentations when they appear. Also, find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Rumble.com. The links will be found below in the comments section and to the right-hand side of the channel banner. A beloved television star, father, husband, and friend is found dead in an Arizona hotel room. From the looks of the crime scene, he suffered a most horrendous and bloody death. Most people who opened their newspapers the morning after the discovery of his body could not believe that one of their most cherished television personalities met with such a gruesome end. What the public did not know was that this much-admired man held a deep, dark secret, an addiction that some believe may have led to his death. On the morning of June 28, 1978, in the city of Scottsdale, Arizona, the summer heat approached nearly 100 degrees before noon of that day. The city's police department responded to a telephone call that emanated from a small apartment complex where someone discovered the badly battered body of a 49-year-old male. When officers walked into the dark space located at the Winfield Apartments, room 132A, they found the man lying sprawled on the bed with two huge gashes right above his left ear and an electrical cord knotted around his neck. Blood spattered all over the wall and ceiling. The pillow was drenched in crimson where it appeared the victim had been laying at the time of the attack. The victim appeared in good health, was well built, and had salt and pepper hair. The apartment had been rented to the Windmill Dinner Theater so that they could accommodate visiting actors who played parts in their various productions. When the police learned about the arrangement, they contacted the theater manager, Ed Beck, and requested that he come to the apartment. When Beck arrived, the authorities requested that he try to identify the middle-aged man lying deceased on the bed. Beck looked at the man and stated that he could not identify the man from his left side, but on his right side, he did recognize the man lying there. Beck identified the corpse as that of Bob Crane of Hogan's Heroes fame. Robert Edward Bob Crane was born in Waterbury, Connecticut on July 13, 1928, the youngest of two sons. In school, he was known for being a class clown and an intense music lover. His favorites were jazz and big band. And Bob's specialty was the drums, and after graduating from Stamford High School in 1946, he turned his attention to his love for music. Crane became a drummer with the Connecticut Symphony Orchestra for about a year. He was later dismissed for not being serious enough. In 1949, Crane married Ann Terzian, his high school sweetheart, and they had 3 children: Robert David Crane Jr., Debbie, and Karen. Crane began his show business career in the early 1950s when he became a disc jockey at a small New York radio station. In 1956, Crane and his family moved from the East Coast to the West Coast of California. Crane worked at KNX Radio and became the king of the airwaves in Los Angeles. His radio program became a huge success, the most listened to on the air, and this was all due to Crane's personality and humor. Crane had charm and an undeniable quick wit, and by the time the 1960s began, Crane had already become the toast of the town when he had a hit breakfast show on KNC Radio in Los Angeles, California. At that time, and the point of his radio popularity, Crane was earning approximately $150,000 per year, a large sum for that point in time. It was during his reign as the king of the LA airwaves that Crane captured the attention of CBS television executives. While interviewing Carl Reiner on his radio show, Reiner offered Crane a small part on The Dick Van Dyke Show. He began making regular guest appearances on The Dick Van Dyke Show, 1961, among others. Soon he landed himself a regular role on The Donna Reed Show as Dr. David Kelsey. However, Crane's character was dropped after 2 seasons because executives decided the flirtatious Kelsey was too suggestive. In 1965, Crane was offered the lead role in a new comedy series based upon a prisoner of war camp during World War II entitled Hogan's Heroes. Crane shot to stardom in the lead role as the show finished in the top 10 regarding ratings for the 1965-66 television season. During his time on the show, Crane divorced his first wife, Anne, and married Patty Olson, whose professional name was Sigrid Valdis, who played Colonel Klink's secretary Greta in the series. They had one son, Scott. As a result of his starring role, Crane was nominated for 2 Emmys, one in 1966 and again in 1967. But this did not stop the network executives to make a decision that affected Crane's career. After the 1971 season, despite continued good ratings and popularity, the new president of CBS abruptly canceled the show. Although this did not seem to bother Crane, as he still found work on network sitcoms, some crime dramas, and some minor motion pictures. In 1975, The Bob Crane Show, a variety vehicle, premiered, and NBC canceled the show after only 3 months. During the course of Hogan's Heroes and throughout his marriage to Anne, Crane was not a faithful husband. His popularity and good looks made him most attractive to a variety of females. It appeared that Crane had an addiction to sex, and with the introduction of John Henry Carpenter into his life, Crane kept a pornographic record of all the conquests during his life as a star. John Henry Carpenter was a video technician and salesman who worked with Sony and could include as his clients Elvis Presley, Alfred Hitchcock, and Richard Dawson. Dawson was one of Crane's co-stars in the Hogan's Heroes series and at the time was not considered to be a tremendous star. But Crane saw Carpenter as a way to use his videotape to enhance his addiction to sex. It was at this time that Crane engaged in a sordid life of sex parties and fantasies that would make the most seasoned pornographic stars blush. Carpenter and Crane frequented bars and lounges in and around Los Angeles looking for young women to engage in their sex parties. Crane often introduced his friend as his manager so that he would have a fighting chance to attract females, as Carpenter was not that handsome of a man. Wherever Crane happened to be, he always took the video equipment with him. It has never been made clear as to whether the tapes that Crane made had the consent of the women involved. In fact, some of the women did not know about the tapes until the police investigating Crane's murder informed them that they existed. Crane continued his acting career and appeared in dinner theaters across the nation, unable to secure any other roles through television or motion pictures. In 1978, Crane bought the rights and began appearing in a play entitled Beginner's Luck. This was a touring company of the production, and on June 6th, cast and crew landed in Scottsdale, Arizona. On June 25th, Crane's friend, Carpenter, joined him in Scottsdale. Carpenter happened to be there as a new sales manager for the Akai Corporation. Crane, according to Carpenter, showed his friend photos of women he had sex with while residing in Scottsdale for the previous 3 weeks. Carpenter booked himself into a local hotel close to Crane's residence and then attended the performance of the play that evening at the Windmill Theater. After the play, the two men went on the prowl for female conquests. This seemed to be a custom with Crane and Carpenter ever since the two became friends a few years before. On the 3rd night of Carpenter's visit, Crane drove one of his co-stars, Victoria Berry, back to the apartments where the cast of the play had been staying after that night's performance. Back at Crane's apartment, Berry overheard Crane having a very heated argument with his ex-wife, Patty Olson. Berry then went to her apartment to retire for the evening. Before midnight, and feeling very aroused, Crane met Carpenter and the two went to Bogart's nightclub to gather some female companionship for the evening. At 2 a.m., Crane and Carpenter went to the Safari restaurant in the company of the two women, Carolyn Barre and Carol Newell. After eating, the four left the restaurant and somehow Carpenter took Newell back to his hotel room. After spurning his advances for a time, Carpenter begrudgingly brought Newell back to her residence. When Carpenter returned to the hotel, he telephoned Crane and learned that he too had no luck with Carolyn Barre. The next morning, at approximately 8:30 a.m., Carpenter returned his rental car to the airport and then caught his plane back to Los Angeles. On June 29, 1978, Victoria Berry made her way to the apartment occupied by Crane. It was 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and when she knocked, she did not receive a response. Berry believed Crane had not left the apartment and tried the door, which she found unlocked. She turned the knob and walked in and discovered Crane's battered body. The police finally arrived at approximately 3 p.m., and Berry told the authorities the identity of the victim. When Lieutenant Ron Dean of the Scottsdale Police Department began to take Berry's statement, the telephone suddenly rang. At the insistence of the detective, Berry answered the phone. The caller was Carpenter, and she informed him that there had been an incident. When Lieutenant Dean took the phone, he identified himself and began asking Carpenter questions. Carpenter responded that he had been with Crane the previous evening until approximately 1 a.m., and they went their separate ways. Carpenter then took a flight back to Los Angeles. Lieutenant Dean believed the conversation had ended and the phone would stop ringing. When the telephone rang again, it was a female friend that Crane met in Arizona. Then his son Robert David Crane had called, whom Carpenter contacted after his first call with the authorities. And then finally, Carpenter called and spoke with Lieutenant Dean again. Lieutenant Dean thought it odd that Carpenter never asked to speak with his friend during the first call. Additionally, Carpenter changed his story somewhat during the second conversation from the one he told the detective during the first telephone call. Lieutenant Dean became very suspicious of John Henry Carpenter's behavior and suspected that Crane's friend knew more than he was telling the police. When Berry discovered Crane's body and then the police arrived, the victim's body was curled up in his bedroom wearing a pair of shorts and an undershirt, with his body covered with a bloody sheet. An electrical cord had been tied tightly around the victim's throat and his skull had been crushed inward. Fragments of brain and skull stained the pillow. The coroner later determined that Crane's death was caused by blunt force trauma with an undetermined heavy object, such as a wrench or a tire iron. The medical examiner determined that Crane had been struck twice with violent force. He appeared to have been murdered in his sleep. After the coroner's determinations, Lieutenant Dean and Officer Dennis Borkenhagen began the investigation in earnest. They ruled out robbery as a theory, and the killer or killers must have had a key to get in and did not lock the door when they exited. At the crime scene, the authorities discovered Crane's secret hobby, and there was a makeshift darkroom set up in the bathroom. The photo album that Crane displayed to Carpenter, based on Carpenter's claims, was missing. The sequestering of the crime scene seemed lax as several items were allowed to be removed before they could be fingerprinted. Relatives and friends of the deceased were allowed to traipse through the crime scene during an active investigation. In speaking with associates of the victim, it turned out that the much-loved star did have a few enemies. Investigators also learned that the jealous partners and husbands of Crane's conquests also swore revenge against the actor. The women in the tapes were also suspects, as investigators theorized that they could be blackmailed with the material and disliked that Crane never informed them of the recordings. Victoria Berry, the woman who discovered Crane's corpse, also stated to police that she lied during her initial interview. She claimed that the dead actor was like a brother to her when, in fact, she had a sexual relationship with Crane. Although there were several questions still lingering about Crane's demise, the authorities concentrated on their main subject, John Henry Carpenter. Upon examining Carpenter's movements surrounding the death of his friend, investigators knew that Carpenter spoke with Crane at about 3 a.m. the day of his murder. Investigators found the rental vehicle that Carpenter used during his stay in Scottsdale and discovered a small blood stain on the passenger side of the vehicle. After the blood sample had been gathered and sent for analysis, the blood belonged to an individual with the blood group type B, only found in 10% of the population. Crane belonged to that 10%. At the Sunburst Motel where Carpenter stayed during his visit with Crane, a maid discovered a bloody pillowcase and washcloth. Unfortunately, the motel staff got rid of the items soon thereafter Carpenter's stay. Lieutenant Dean and Borkehagen decided they needed to interview Carpenter further. The two escorted the suspect back to Arizona and did not really possess any proof that linked Carpenter to Crane's murder. The detectives questioned Carpenter about the missing photo album with the photos of the naked women. They informed the suspect that the album was not there when they examined the crime scene. On July 14, 1978, police questioned Carpenter again and he became belligerent, adamantly protesting that he was not involved with Crane's death. The investigation stood dormant for almost 2 years when investigators decided to go after Carpenter for Crane's murder. The new state's attorney in Arizona, Tom Collins, stated that there was just not enough evidence to maintain a conviction against Carpenter at the time. In 1989, with the case all but forgotten, police arrested John Henry Carpenter for the murder of Bob Crane after new evidence had been uncovered that Crane became tired of Carpenter and was ready to cut the friendship ties. Carpenter truly believed that Crane was his golden goose, meaning that he helped Carpenter to meet women. Why would Carpenter murder him? The investigative team found several witnesses that Crane was about to tell Carpenter that he wanted to end the friendship. On September 12, 1994, Carpenter's trial began for the murder of Bob Crane. The evidence introduced at the trial included a photo of the blood found in the rental car that Carpenter used during his stay in Scottsdale, Arizona. The prosecutor in the case stated that because the blood type was very rare and that Crane belonged to that blood group, the inference can be made that the blood in Carpenter's car belonged to Crane. The prosecutor added that the blood from the car also contained brain tissue from the victim's skull. The defense contended that the blood obtained from the car was minuscule, and since the prosecution could not ascertain positively that the blood belonged to Bob Crane, his client could not be held accountable for the murder. The prosecution then produced what they believed to be the murder weapon, a camera tripod. The wounds found on Crane's skull were recreated in a forensic lab. Patty Olson testified in front of the court that Crane always traveled with 2 camera tripods, but only one was located at the crime scene. A blood spatter expert testified that the blood stains on the wall and the ceiling were consistent with using the tripod as a murder weapon. A videotape shown to the court demonstrated the use of the 2 tripods. The prosecution then outlined their case for the court and stated that Crane became tired of Carpenter and he became a nuisance. A theory that the prosecution substantiated with the testimony of Crane's son, Robert David Crane, who stated that his father told him about his intention to eliminate Carpenter from his life. Stephen Avila, Carpenter's defense attorney, stated before the court that every piece of evidence the prosecution presented at trial was circumstantial, and the whole case relied on speculation. Avila also attacked the investigation as a whole, mentioning that the crime scene had been trampled before technicians could gather any evidence. The defense also mentioned that the killer could have been any number of people, including, but not limited to, those women that Crane videotaped without their permission and could surmise that the tapes may have been used as blackmail material. During the course of the trial, the defense produced a witness named Walter Lee Fetty. Fetty claimed to have been moving furniture the morning that Crane was found dead. He testified that he witnessed a man who stood approximately 5'9", black hair with gray streaks, coming out of Crane's apartment. He re-entered the apartment and then exited again a short time later. The mysterious man then asked Fetty for a light to his cigarette, and Fetty related how the strange man wanted Fetty to move his truck. He was blocking the man's car in. The defense asked Fetty if the defendant was the man he saw coming out of Crane's apartment. Fetty responded, "That ain't the man that came out of that apartment, and that ain't the man I lit the cigarette for." On Halloween 1994, a jury acquitted John Henry Carpenter of the murder of Bob Crane. Carpenter had been a suspect in that murder for 16 years, and the law finally vindicated him. His defense attorney, Avila, stated that the investigation into Crane's murder had been bungled so badly that the killer may never be apprehended. On September 4, 1998, Carpenter passed away at the age of 70. Since the acquittal of John Henry Carpenter, no one else has been charged with Crane's murder. The case still remains unsolved to this day. Robert Crane has forwarded another suspect to his father's murder, and that is his stepmother, Patty Olson. She stood to inherit Crane's estate after his death, which was a comfortable sum. But then again, if she hated her husband that much, why did she make her last wish to be buried next to him in the family plot? Crane Jr. also inferred that Carpenter may have been bisexual, and once he advanced on Crane, Crane spurred those advances, causing Carpenter great anger and hurt. Many fans who learned of Crane's sexual appetites felt betrayed to a certain extent. They marveled at the man's career, beginning in the form of a drummer to a radio announcer, and then to a famous television personality. As fans, most of the time, we refuse to accept an idol's life beyond what we see on the screen, especially if it involves some sordid details. It suits our fantasies about the entertainment world and helps us to elevate those we idolize to be above the real world. But with Robert Edward Crane, the deviancy proved more than factual, and the evidence certainly produced over the years proved Crane to be just another human being. Now, if you would like to support our channel, you can find us on Subscribestar, PayPal, and Rumble.com. I will leave the links below. Until next time.